Okay, so after World War II, 1945, New Hampshire uh, experienced a huge population growth. Uh, the Having roughly 500,000 people in 1945, population went up to about 1.3 million in 2010. Um, Interestingly, the ethnicity has changed. New Hampshire is often criticized for being white. The And in fact, just using the latest figures, about 93.9%, according to the 2015 count, were white. Interestingly, that breaks down to Irish 19.4%, English 18%, French 14.6%, and going on from there. Um, Blacks 1.5%, Indians, American Indians 0.3%. That is rising. Not sure if I think it's largely a matter of people more identifying with their culture. Asians, 2.6% of the population, and Hispanics, 3.4%. Um, just anecdotally, one of the things that has changed, you can get actual ingredients for Chinese food in supermarkets. That was something that was very rare. The only thing that you saw that remotely resembled it was that La Choy stuff, with the can of noodles and then the can of goop and a separate can of goop taped to it. Um, and now you can get wonton wrappers, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, as you can tell, I don't miss many meals. So anyway, but some things have contributed to that change or been part of it. Some of the things I've identified is, first of all, the advent of Interstate 93. For most of you, that's always been part of the landscape. I remember when it opened up and we could get to Concord. That was a big deal. And the first, it was part of the Federal Highway Aid Act of 1956, basically. During World War II, Americans had gotten a look at the Autobahn in Germany and said, hey, wow, we could get around. And it was also there were defense overtones. It was going to be good to be able to move things faster in a defensive situation. But they expressed the idea that you could drive, from one coast to the other and never see a stoplight. I don't know how they worked in gas stops and potty stops, but we'll leave that for another discussion. But anyway, the first section opened in 1957, and it was finally completed in 1988. The last part was going through Franconia Notch. And even that's kind of a bad compromise. But the state, basically from Salem, to the north, has been connected with it. Once again, going north-south. Yes, I did bring in Mr. Glacier, didn't I? Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, the interesting thing is the first exit was to Rockingham Park, and that was an off ramp from the south and an on ramp going to the south. Basically, the idea was to bring people in from Boston to gamble at Rockingham Park, which at the time was a huge source of revenue to the state. But anyway, 93 opened up a lot of southern New Hampshire to residential construction and commuters, and resulted in a lot of the population growth we've seen and the some of the cultural changes that have come about. One, I'm not sure how much of a cultural change it brought about, but the sweepstakes, again, you don't remember a time when there wasn't a sweepstakes machine in every convenience store. Up until 1963, it had been proposed and defeated, but Governor King needed money to finance education, and was finally able to pass have the legislature pass a limited sweepstakes program. Basically, the drawings were infrequent, but they'd be geared to a horse race at Rockingham Park. In order for that to go forward, there was a special election in March of 1964. It was held in conjunction with the New Hampshire primary, where each town could vote on whether to allow the sale of sweepstakes tickets in their town or city. 198 out of 211 of the towns voted to allow it. It was a very hotly contested thing. A lot of feelings ran high, and I remember it being particularly contentious. There was an odd coalition that opposed it. Not saying the people were odd, but the combination was strange. It involved liberal groups who worried that it basically amounted to a tax on the poor or people who hadn't taken statistics, and also church groups who were opposed on moral grounds. So anyway, just a cultural change that has happened in my lifetime. Okay, another one that brought about change, Seabrook Station. Again, that's been generating power since 1986. Again, you may not have plugged in anything that didn't draw from Seabrook Station. It was proposed in 1968. It was a product of a period where nuclear energy was seen as the wave of the future. There was a lot of talk and promotion of the all-electric home. Everything would be electric: heat, light, cooking, the whole gamut. And people, some pretty smart people, in fact, bought into that. Anyway, opposition to it grew on environmental grounds. And in fact, demonstrations started in 1976. There were approximately 600 people there. In 1977, it was up to 2,000, and that year, 1,414 were arrested on criminal trespass charges. Interesting sidelight, they refused bail, so they had to be arraigned immediately, and that caused a huge clog in the court system. Delays and cost overruns ended up bankrupting Public Service of New Hampshire, which had been founded in 1926, and that had serious consequences. There was also the matter of the Olympic refinery proposal in Durham in 1973 and 1974. This would have been established on Durham Point, and supertankers would be stopping at the Isles of Shoals to discharge cargo. This thing was so huge, there were proposals to run a pipeline from Lake Winnipesaukee down to Durham to draw water to cool the thing. This met with a lot of opposition in Durham and surrounding areas. Again, environmental impacts led the way, and there were efforts to make it mandatory for local areas to take such projects, and a home rule bill quashed that. I'd point out real briefly that that Governor Meldrum Thompson and the publisher of the Manchester Union Leader, William Loeb, were supporters of both projects and contributed to a very polarized view of the matter. I think it made a huge change in New Hampshire politics, which was very much consensus-based. Very much, there was a very, very narrow difference between the parties and how they functioned, and I think it leads to the polarized has led to the polarized sort of thing that you did. In addition, this has given the liberal end of the spectrum a voice. That was expressed in the Claremont case, which was brought based on the state's obligation under the New Hampshire Constitution to provide adequate education and funding, and basically that coalition that we saw established in there was part of it. Now, I have this great theory on that, and where was this coalition that I talk about during the Northern Pass issue? Remember, Northern Pass was a project proposed to bring power from tidal basins in Canada down through and to be distributed in places like Franklin and Hillsborough to go to the net. And again, opposition to that centered around various impacts. But you didn't see the same degree of passion, the same degree of of stridency in the opposition. It was all pretty muted, and I'm still puzzled by that. I expected more from that end of the spectrum. So, in any event, New Hampshire has changed. I've got my doubts as to whether it's for the better or not, but my opinion, and $1.09 will get you a cup of coffee at Cumberland Farms. So anyway, we'll be wrapping this up over the next couple of weeks. We'll see you next week briefly. I'm looking forward to seeing your presentations.